So welcome everyone. If you don't know me, my name is Peter Langford. I'm the Director of Voice Project. I'm excited that you're all able to join today. I know it's busy in the run up to Christmas, only 23 days to Chrissy now. But thank you for your time. We will be hearing shortly from Karen Zoch, who is the Director of People and Communication at Lives Lived Well. Karen's got a great story to tell about how Lives Lived Well has grown, transformed, and powered through the pandemic. I'll introduce Karen in a moment, but just a few introductory things first. As an acknowledgement of country, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we all meet today and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I'd also like to explain the chat and Q&A functions for today's webinar. You're probably all quite familiar with Zoom now. And quite familiar with the chat function. The chat function is to be used for chatting with other attendees. But if you want to submit questions for our speaker, Karen, today, please do so through the Q&A button, which is the double speech bubble button. So that's the one that we'll be moderating for the questions that Karen will address a little bit later. Now, I know many of you know Voice Project quite well, but for those of you who don't, let me do a quick introduction to who we are. We deliver state-of-the-art surveys to get the best feedback and insights to drive positive change. Our services include employee surveys, life cycle surveys such as onboarding, pulse, exits surveys, 360 surveys, client surveys, focus groups, action planning. Our key point of difference is market-leading personal service. And across this year, we've had an overall satisfaction from our clients of 99%, with a net promoter score of 79, which is right up there in terms of the best in the world, and a 2-year loyalty rate, meaning that 97% of clients say that they'll be working with us in 2 years' time. We have great tech, bedded in deep research, carefully curated industry benchmarks, as well as a couple of workplace awards programs, our Best Workplace Awards and our Change Champion Awards. But while there's a lot of focus on tech these days, we know that most importantly, our clients need trusted personal service to design, deploy, analyze, report, and action their surveys. And a bit of background for us, we grew out of a research project at Macquarie University. And since 2002, we've delivered surveys to almost 4 million people. I'd like to briefly recognise our Best Workplace Award winners. I mentioned we've got 2 awards programs. I'm going to focus on the Best Workplace Awards this time because Lives Lived Well is, in fact, a 2-time winner of one of these awards. Our Change Champion Awards recognise those organisations that are improving the most, and our Best Workplace Awards recognise our highest performing clients. There's too many to mention. You can see all of our 2021 winners on the right-hand side there. You might recognise some of their logos. And we have case studies for some of those, some great stories available on our website. Okay, it's now time to introduce Karen for our main feature. Karen is the Director of People and Communication at Lives Lived Well. She's going to step us through how Lives Lived Well has navigated extensive growth and COVID to become one of Voice Project's strongest performing clients. Karen has an extensive history in human resources, previously in government, but says she fulfilled a career goal with her move into the for-purpose sector. And she describes her executive role at Lives Lived Well as her dream job, with a blend of people experience functions, including HR, capability building, communications, marketing. She's also active in the community as a lifelong volunteer, holding leadership roles with organisations in disability services, education, sport and rec sectors, including being a board member of Best Life, which is a disability services provider for young people. On a personal note, she's been an avid tennis fan from her teenage years and met her husband on the tennis courts. They are still playing together, and I'm referring to the tennis court, of course, and have chalked up, well, almost 15 years of annual pilgrimage to the Australian Open, but it was broken by COVID, unfortunately. but she will be getting back to the Australian Open, but in particular, her next goal is to attend the French Open. And in fact, that picture of Karen that's on the screen at the moment was taken at Wimbledon. I've just been informed, and you may know of that leafy wall in Wimbledon. So yes, I know well. All right, so with that little bit of goss out of the way, it is with great pleasure that I welcome Karen Zoch to the virtual podium. Over to you, Karen.
Thank you very much, Peter, and thank you very much for this invitation from Voice Project to share some of our story. We've worked with Voice Project since 2016, so we've definitely ticked over more than the 2 years, and it's quite an honour to be asked to share our story. But it was an invitation that I did feel a little bit uncomfortable about. One of our values as an organisation is being human, humble, and full of hope. So in terms of showcasing our story, doesn't really sit comfortably with the humble part. But another one of our values is show up and share. So that's the value that I'm calling on today, and hoping that some of our story resonates for you. I'll also acknowledge the traditional owners. It's the Turrbal and Yagara people here in Brisbane, where I am. And in making that acknowledgement, it brings to mind the thousands of years of storytelling that's happened before us, and that's, to me, that's what we're doing today, sharing a story. So in terms of what I'd like to talk to you about today, I'd like to give you a little bit of context about Lives Lived Well to start with. Unless you've been in the position of using our services, or perhaps knowing someone who's used our services, it's pretty likely that you're not going to know who we are. So we're an organisation that provides drug and alcohol services. And we operate across Queensland and New South Wales. So we offer drug and alcohol in the main, also mental health. In particular, we operate some headspace services on the Gold Coast and south of Brisbane, and also we partner with Beyond Blue for some low intensity adult mental health services. We also support people with gambling, and also supporting people who have spent time in a correctional facility and transitioning back to the workplace. You can see we've got that presence across Queensland and New South Wales, across the eastern seaboard, and certainly in remote locations. And there's a few there that haven't made the map yet. So we're moving into Mount Isa, Bundaberg and Broken Hill, to name a few others. So as you can see from the numbers there, pretty busy time for us. Many programs across 52 locations, and over 25,000 clients in the last financial year. So in terms of our journey as an organisation, just to give you a little bit of context for that, because as Peter said, this is a story about operating as an organisation, you know, as we all have at different times, but particularly recently through growth and change and challenge. So Lives Lived Well came about from a merge in 2012 for some previous Queensland-based organisations that had long-standing histories of their own. And after that merge, the world really started to change for us around 2016. And between 2016, our staff profile grew from 120 up to about 520 now. Our revenue growth was from 21 million, and we're now sitting at about 62 million. So we've had many new services, we've opened in new areas, we've developed new clinical models, diversified our services, and during that time as well, part of our growth is attributed to some other mergers that we've done. So in 2017, we merged with a New South Wales-based organisation, and then had another merge in 2020 with the watershed. So, as you know, those exercises take a lot of time and take a lot of effort, and they literally don't happen overnight. Whilst we've been growing in terms of our footprint as an organisation, we've also been building our organisation. So over that time, we've needed to put in HR systems, finance system, a client management system, and as you're growing as an organisation, needing to adapt the way that you do things. So in terms of processes and governance and structure, literally, we've been building the plane as we've been flying it. So over this time, through our engagement surveys as a key measure that we've done through Voice Project, we have performed strongly across our engagement surveys, and I was expecting to see some different things this time, but we've managed to maintain some strong scores. Of course, as always, there's things to improve and work on, but given that context of that growth and that change, you know, I have reflected on, well, how are we managing to maintain that, and what are the things that our people tell us that makes LLW a great place to work. And certainly some of the most common responses that we get is it's naturally the work that we do, but it's also culture is what people often say. So that brought to mind to me the infamous saying by our dear friend in HR, Peter Drucker. Sorry, I'll just slip back. So in terms of culture, eat strategy for breakfast. I know it's the end of a long year. You probably don't want to be asked tough questions and have to make decisions, but I'm going to ask you to do that. So Emma will put up a poll question for us, and off the top of your head, what do you think that's a true statement or a false statement? We'll just wait for the question to come up. It might take a few seconds. So I think we're seeing the results of the poll on screen now. So, wow, culture gets lots of votes. So for me, if I was thinking back to earlier in my career, culture would have got my vote too, every time, hands down. But I suppose as I've progressed through the various experiences in different organisations, for me, the need for a vision and a strategy for achieving that vision applies to culture as well. For me, I'll vote for strategy, and really that's about having that clear direction so that when you're working on any aspect in the HR or the OD landscape, including in culture shaping, you know what levers to pull to get you to work to progress towards your goal. So I will say it's all about strategy, but I've got a caveat, and that is including in that strategy something about your people experience is absolutely critical. So for us, shaping our people experience and being very intentional about the investment that we make in people and what that investment looks like is a key pillar of our organisational strategy. We've made very deliberate decisions about how we manage the growth and the tensions and the challenges and the opportunities that arise through that extra growth. So in talking about what are some of those levers that we've pulled over the last couple of years, I'm going to focus a little bit on strategy, also on leadership. Creating connection across the organisation has been a very significant part for us. Wellbeing, the nature of our work, as you can imagine, certainly presents the need for good mental health, good self-care, and attention to wellbeing, and of course, shaping our culture. So in terms of strategy, and I'm not going to take you in detail through this, but just to give you a bit of a sense of the context of how we look at this. This is how we represent our organisational strategy and how we communicate that across the organisation. And it's based on the work of Jim Collins through Good to Great in terms of the concept of a flywheel, but also certainly influenced by the work of Simon Sinek in terms of understanding your why and having a clear purpose. So for us at the core is with the right support, people can change their lives. That drives everything that we do. Whether that's for clients, and certainly there's a focus there, but also internally focused as well. How can we help people thrive within our organisation? And we're in the game of recovery. So if you didn't believe that what we did actually makes a difference, you wouldn't be bothered doing it. So that core, that why is really important to us. We use a set of strategic anchors that are fairly stable through time. And this really helps us steer the course. So these are common themes that we're paying attention to strategically as we progress towards our future vision. Delivering evidence-based services for client outcomes is absolutely critical. You can see here again this intentional strategy around our workforce through an engaged and capable people, and being a strong, sustainable, efficient operation. This is where the flywheel then comes in, and the concept here is around creating momentum through the activities that you do. So you obviously start with an idea, you execute it well. For us, because we're funded through government funding with contract managers, if we perform well, that increases their regard for us, which leads to new funding opportunities. And then we're attractive for new people to come and join us. And because we're working on the people stuff, for people to stay with us as well. And then, of course, as a values-based organisation, it's all wrapped up in our values. So we've used this for the last probably 18 months as a way of explaining our strategy to the organisation. And it's really cut through. So each year as we do our annual business planning, there'll be a range of activities or initiatives that will sit in each of these areas. And we update people as we're progressing through those. In terms of how this has cut through, our awareness, our Voice Project's People Survey score on awareness of the vision that the executive has for LLW, that increased 17% this time to 86%. So a good result, I think. We then translate that down even a little bit further. So in terms of that segment of the flywheel and the strategic anchor about engaged and capable people, well, what does that actually look like? So we encompass that in a people strategy. So you can see the links there to our purpose and to our strategy. And then, there's really our vision about when we're talking about a great place to work, what does that look like? And again, I'm not going to go through this in detail, but just to give you a sense of how we then break that up. We look at, well, what are the elements, you know, the levers, I suppose, of our people experience that we're working on. What are the elements of those things that we want to concentrate on? What's the end state for those? What's the vision around each of those elements? And then over 1 year, 2 years, there's a series of initiatives that support that. So when I say I vote for strategy, this is a representation of why we think this is so important. We obviously think it's working for us, but you can see the importance of people and culture amongst a number of other things in the people space that are reflected there. So it is very intentional. So moving on to the culture piece a little bit more specifically. Whilst we've achieved that clarity of purpose and progress through the flywheel, the refresh work that we did on our values late last year has also really cut through. So we had some, you know, fairly standard corporate type values, which reflected really important things like integrity and trust. But, you know, they didn't really represent who we are, what makes us unique, what makes us different, what makes our people tick. So we went through an exercise around, well, how do we represent that properly? And look, this is probably an example of where, whilst it has landed extremely well and was picked up really quickly across the organisation, it's become part of our everyday language. You know, it was a bit of a journey to get there. And in many ways, I'll call it the biggest success of my career, but I had a really big fail in getting there. So, you know, classic case of the destination is really, really important, but the journey was an interesting one. But we were really committed to it. It would have been easy for my CEO to say to me, don't think we've quite got this, Karen, but we persevered and we're reaping the benefits of that. In terms of leadership, again, what we've done is really try and describe what does it look like to lead in LLW. So of course, there's common facets of leadership in every setting, but pulling from our strategy and also from our values, what is it that we want leaders to be paying attention to here? So we've developed quite a simple leadership framework. There are some behavioural statements that sit under each of these components. Might be 4 or 5, but again, quite simple. We did not want a complex multi-layered model here. So we're using this certainly through our leadership training. What are we focusing our investment on there? Recruitment of new leaders, stepping people up into leadership and preparing them for leadership, and also through performance reviews, 360 assessments, all of those sorts of things, so that this is blended through that. Leadership is something that we've really paid a lot of attention to. And, you know, we're very fortunate to have a CEO who believes in the importance of the investment in people, but also in the critical role that leaders play. And he role models that beautifully. That's our CEO, Mitchell Giles. Our view is that leaders are the most influential relationship that employees have in organisations. And it's very clear for us, and again, we can see this through our survey results, when leadership's done well, it really clearly shows. When it's not done so well, it also very, very clearly shows. Now, connection is another area that we have spent quite a lot of time on. And I suppose this in terms of getting into some specific examples of actions that we've taken. So as we've grown and become more dispersed, both geographically and also more diverse in the kinds of services and the kinds of people we're bringing into the organisation, connection and alignment was very important for us to retain. And I really characterise this in the sense of it's both a hearts and a minds exercise. So we certainly look at multiple channels from when people first begin in the organisation throughout their journey. So some of those sorts of things are, we bring everyone from across Queensland and New South Wales to Brisbane for induction. They meet the executive team, they hear about the strategy, they hear about our clinical framework, they hear about our values, so that we're creating an expectation, setting a standard that they then need to hold us to account for to achieve. We've also introduced a range of communication activities. They're things like town halls, where I'm doing one 15 minutes after we finish today, where we bring the whole organisation together, and that's an opportunity for information sharing with the executive team. Leader-led communication is very important to us. We provide a monthly brief for all leaders in the organisation to work through. And we have a communication hub through our intranet, which enables us to provide stories, blogs, that sort of thing. Other concepts that have worked really well is around activities we've put in place to remove filters in communication in the organisation. So we have management one-to-ones that they are absolutely sacrosanct. That has to happen for every employee on a very, very regular basis. We also have skip meetings where teams will meet with the leader above their leader. And because we've got a very flat structure, those meetings are mostly then held with our senior manager or an executive team member, and they've been very well received and very effective. And it's really an illustration of our show up and share value in action. Focus groups, we run those a couple of times a year, which are a very big exercise. And again, that's just another opportunity for people to be able to, in a more anonymous way, provide feedback, suggestions, ideas, and we're looking to put in other mechanisms next year, such as an innovation hub, where we can really help people to surface their ideas throughout the organisation. And then in terms of the connection piece, it's something that we find people say they always want more of it. And I often say it's a bit like Goldilocks. It's never just right in terms of communication and connecting with other people across the organisation. It's always too little or too much, but we keep aiming to get that just right. So certainly the things like, regular executive visits, COVID notwithstanding, and creating sort of cross-functional, cross-purpose teams in a number of different ways across the organisation. One new initiative that's worked really well is some peer recognition work. And again, we use our communication portal, which we call Wellspring, that enables people to send e-cards to each other, recognising birthdays, anniversaries, but also when they're living the values or for a job well done, all of those kinds of things. I mentioned earlier how important well-being is for us. So we certainly have a wellness strategy, which we're about to renew. And the nature of the work that we do, there is a risk of burnout, certainly. And our people sometimes deal with very significant or in some cases traumatising events. And a lot of their days they're listening to trauma and chaos and concerns in other people's lives. So we have a strong focus on a shared responsibility for well-being. So there's the self-care elements for each of us as individuals, which as an organisation we support. And then we do other things, such as we offer 5 extra paid leave days a year, which we call LLW leave, which you can use for wellness purposes. Clinical support's very important, supervision, debriefing, incident response, communities of support, and another mechanism that we have in place. We believe that, you know, wellness happens every day, and we do have what we call a wellness week every year, and that's just a focus for the year, that at that week of the year, everybody's doing something about wellness at the same time. And you can see some of the photos of some of the things that people get up to during Wellness Week. So it lands really well. But one of our goals in Wellness Week every year is to remind people to build those local team activities in to their normal working day. And, you know, they don't have to cost very much, well, if anything at all, apart from a little bit of time. So in terms of all of those levers that we've pulled, where has that got us? So if you're not familiar with the Voice Project engagement survey, this is looking at the 3 outcome measures around engagement, so how connected people are with the organisation, how they see their role fitting in with the organisation, well-being, which is self-evident, and in terms of progress, you know, are people coming along with the organisation? Do they see a future? Are they experiencing, you know, positive change management in the organisation? So for our survey this year, we increased in engagement, which I didn't expect, just from the sheer fact of, you know, what we've all been through over the last nearly 2 years, plus the addition of the change that we've had in our organisation as well. Well-being, of course, we'd like to see that a little bit higher, but again, that's maintained very stably throughout the last couple of years, and it's an area where people in the organisation have certainly highlighted in terms of the level of support and communication that they felt during the whole COVID experience. And given the amount of work that we've done around strategy, seeing how much people are on board with moving with us was also very affirming. So in looking at some of the specific areas of focus, so these are some things that we've worked on over the last 12 months. And this is a snapshot from our Voice Project survey. So here's some questions that were asked. Here's the score that we achieved, some comparison to previous surveys, the distribution, usual strongly disagree through to strongly agree, and then where we're tracking against the industry benchmarks. So at looking at some of those results, again, they're levers that we've been trying to work on. Some of these you expect to be high in a for-purpose organisation, and of course we reflect that in our scores as well. But we've, you know, certainly seen some improvements over that time to what were already high scores. And as I mentioned before, there's been that big change in people understanding the vision of the organisation and getting on board with that. So then in terms of some things that we have been working on in the organisation, so we introduced a formal performance review process for the first time. It's the only organisation I've ever worked in where people ask for a formal performance review process. So again, you can see that's landed quite well, and that people, are understanding, how they are contributing and what we're expecting of them. Training and development, again, you've seen that that's a strategic intent to have engaged and capable people, and we've made a big investment in that. We've got areas where in training that we need to still keep working on. So we put effort into the new starter experience, but that hasn't landed or not reflected in the scores as well as we'd like them to see. So that's an area that we'll continue working on. And then in terms of the work we've put in around communication and connection, again, seeing people have that opportunity to put forward their ideas, that their contribution is recognised, and that there's an understanding of what's happening across the organisation. And you can see that people have seen a big difference in how we're sharing knowledge. Again, we've got some challenges around people feeling very confident about putting forward their ideas. So they're absolutely showing up and sharing, but they'd like to see a little bit more from us in terms of having confidence in their ideas being considered or put into progress. And just this last set of results that I'll share with you, because I think there's a story in these results around leadership. Certainly the traditional pattern in how staff members view their leader is that they have the highest regard for their local supervisor, unless of course there's an issue there. And as you move up the organisational tree, those scores tend to dip, which makes sense. They don't have the visibility and the relationships. For us, we're not seeing that. We're seeing a pattern from local leadership through to senior leadership and to executive, and you can see the improvements in the scores that have been achieved there. So while we've certainly made intentional efforts around increasing access and increasing visibility, I think one of the key things here is how local leaders have helped their teams align and engage in the opportunities in the organisation. So I certainly wouldn't, put these scores down solely to what the executive team are doing. It's about that alignment right across the organisation, led by leaders. So moving on to thinking about the COVID experience, which of course just seems to continue. So in thinking about how we responded to COVID, so all of these things that I've just spoken to you about, these are things that have happened over the last 2 years. So we've been absolutely working on the organisation. We've been growing the organisation, and then of course dealing with COVID as well. So we went to a principles-based approach, and again, this was really to help with employees understanding what we were doing as an organisation, that we were on it, that we were trying to be as proactive as you could, given that we were all trying to work out what in the world to do. So we certainly went through developed what we called the 3 Cs, and we wanted to give people assurance about their jobs. We wanted to absolutely ensure that clients continue to receive services. We wanted our workforce to feel that, we've got this, it's in hand, we're going to work through it. And then we wanted them to be very clear on what decisions we were making, and for them to see those very clearly. If I had my time again, I'd put in another C, which would be around connection and support, because that was certainly one of the things that we paid a lot of attention to and seemed to reap dividends. So in terms of some of the specific things that we did, as you've seen, many of our teams were already dispersed teams, so had quite a bit of experience in how to work in a remote way. But again, we made that a very intentional thing, that check-ins, for example, were to happen at a specific regularity, and some teams were doing that twice a day. So the kinds of things that we did was certainly giving that assurance, particularly in the clinical space, was really important. People needed to know how to do their jobs, how to keep themselves safe, and how to keep their clients safe. And then, how to keep their families safe when they did go home or move from the office into the lounge room. So we certainly gave very, very clear written guidance on that. The work continuity and purpose, again, that was something that we wanted people to feel that they had a reason to be moving from the bedroom to the lounge room in the morning, and that they could still continue to support clients, because we were very concerned about the well-being of clients. We did think that people would be, twiddling their thumbs a bit and not have much to do. So we put in a lot of extra things, so extra training and so on. And in fact, we probably, or more than probably, we overdid that. So we had to pull back on some of that, because what we found is that the demand for services actually went through the roof, which in hindsight shouldn't have been a surprise, but we didn't know how that was going to play out. Certainly, daily communications was a really important part of people feeling confident that we were onto it, that we were looking after them, that we were looking after clients, and that we were moving and changing and adapting as we all had to do. And sometimes it was almost daily. We introduced a Wellbeing Wednesday publication, which was, all some serious, health messages, but also, just some lighthearted fun. And again, what was everybody doing in lockdown? As the demand for services increased, and we started to hear that people were struggling with that demand, and also starting to suffer from some fatigue after the first few months. We really, again, made it very explicit around, well, we can't be everything to everyone. So we put in specific initiatives around managing the demand from clients coming in. And we also gave really explicit permission around, sitting, doing your counselling sessions back to back on Zoom, very, very draining. You don't need to do so many sessions. Have more breaks, go for a walk around the block. You still need to take leave. And it wasn't so much an issue that people didn't want to take leave because they didn't, had nowhere to go. They didn't want to leave their clients in the lurch, or they didn't want to put more pressure on their colleagues. So we really asked our employees to let us worry about that, and for them to take some breaks to do what they needed to do for their health. We did make some assumptions that because many of us work in remote locations, work away from teams, or out in the community doing outreach work a lot, that we all knew how to do this remote working, but that wasn't the case. So we again, paid attention to making sure people knew how to do that in an effective way, and that it is different from working in an office. We really found the simple gestures made a big difference. So I mentioned the Wellbeing Wednesday that we did. We certainly gave some gifts when people were coming back to work after the first major lockdown last year. And for our New South Wales colleagues this year, that was probably an example of where we didn't really get the pulse of what was happening in New South Wales well enough, and we were a little bit slow to respond there. So in Queensland, we've been in and out of short lockdowns quite a lot. So you just turn on your lockdown response, turn it off, turn it on, turn it off. In New South Wales, they hadn't had that experience of in and out and lockdown. So when they did go back into lockdown, and then of course it extended for quite some time, we needed to sort of adapt what had been a very local-led response to, again, making it a very visible organisational response. And we did send them a hug in a mug as a little gift. And things like, we gave them some lunch vouchers or meal allowances. We gave them, if they took some leave, they were given some extra free leave, if you like. Again, that executive visibility was really important. We did very regular meetings with the management group and the leadership group. As I've said, the communication was extensive, and certainly in terms of being really clear with local leaders about how they connect with their teams. Again, that they were used to working with people remotely, but it was really about helping them bring the whole team together. That was something that hadn't been done as regularly, so we certainly paid particular attention to that, and adapting our response as we went through. So in terms of, out of what we know as a dispersed workforce and what we've learned over the last months, some things that I'd put up as our top tips. And I'm really struggling to read those, so let me just go to my notes. So start as you mean to go on. So there, in terms of, I mentioned earlier around our induction program, really setting those expectations and letting them really see, touch, taste, feel the culture of the organisation right from the get-go is really critical for us. It's a big investment that we make, everyone coming to Brisbane for 3 days, but it's one that we make gladly, and we believe we reap the rewards from that. In terms of that sense of shared purpose and the contribution that people make to that, again, for a for-purpose organisation, that's really critical. It's pretty much embedded in any for-purpose organisation, but it's that alignment to what we're achieving as an organisation that's really critical. The different mechanisms to remove filters. So the town halls, the skip meetings, the focus groups, using the blogs and being able to comment on organisational communications, that the whole ethos of show up and share is a really important aspect for us. One of the things that we're very big on trying to do is to close the feedback loop. So if someone, through one of these mechanisms, or for example, through the people survey that we've only recently conducted, it's closing that feedback loop. So going back to people and saying, you told us this is what we heard, this is what we're going to do about it, or in some cases, not going to do about something, and that's the reasons, and the reasons why are. The connections across the organisation, there's a really high thirst for that. So again, it's those mechanisms that I've already spoken about help with that, but the cross-functional opportunities are really important as well. And a key one we do for that is communities of practice around specific occupations or specific kinds of services. Certainly in terms of the virtual experience that we all now know and love so well, there's things that we would have said previously, oh, look, we're not going to do that virtually. It's just not going to land. And, you know, we know now that it absolutely can land. I don't think we would have ever started town halls previously to this, because we would have thought it was really important to be there in person. But by doing that out of necessity, we can see how it can work really well. And it wouldn't be the only mechanism that you use, but as part of the suite, it's very effective. The leadership aspects that we talked about before. So again, we make that investment in our leadership. We have leadership forums for our first level supervisors and for our senior management several times a year. And again, that's about bringing people together. And you know, the usual range of leadership development options that are available to people. We certainly bring our management group together with the executive group every month. So it's a large meeting, but we use that for information sharing, for consultation, to bring up ideas and so on. It's certainly not a decision-making group though.
Karen, I'm just wondering, we've got a good chunk of questions, and I'm wondering if we can jump into some questions now. Is that all right? Yeah,
absolutely.
There's been a couple of questions about the values, and you also alluded to a fail early on, and there's been a question about that as well. So I can't let you go on that one. What was that fail in terms of trying to set up those values and the Lives Lived Well approach?
So we'd undertaken some discovery processes throughout the organisation to really just try and surface, well, how is it that employees describe the experience of working here? What is it that they think? What words do they use to describe that? What behaviours do they see, etc. All the usual things that you do, and then in attempting to undertake a consultation with our board around that, that didn't go so well. So where it was really a fail was that while it was an attempt to consult with the board rather than present them with a fait accompli, they saw it as a fait accompli, and of course then hadn't felt they'd been part of the journey all the way along. And it was the board that had developed our original values. So they had a lot of ownership over them. So that's where the fail was. So you know, we left a bit of time, licked our wounds for a little bit, and then, you know, regathered our optimism and our efforts, and really looked at, okay, how can we bring the board along with us, and we also invested in some external support to help us take all the lovely, you know, sentiments and the very highly held beliefs and to turn them into the words that I showed you previously.
Good tip there, bring board along, and they're not the group that you want to put offside as well in something like this. So yeah, all right. Yes. On that note, there's a question about middle managers. So one issue is looking at the board, but how did you get the middle managers on side throughout this process?
In terms of the values?
The whole process of change. So how did you get them engaged, agreeing, actioning what you wanted them to action?
Okay. So I'd go back to the clarity of the vision for the organisation and the strategy to support that, and that you know, while as a board and an executive group, you this is the direction that we're setting for the organisation, to bring that to fruition. That middle management group are absolutely key in that. So,
did you get much resistance, or were they in large part supportive? They were on board early on.
Oh, look, I think they're on board. It's where it does get tricky is when you're in the implementation phase, and then of course there's the pressure of implementing something, but there's a bunch of other things going on. So, for example, in February last year, while COVID was hitting, we had just started the implementation of a brand new client relationship management system. So that system, most people in the organisation use it for most of their working day. So it's a really significant change for an organisation. And then how we had to continue with it because we'd already started the implementation. We had to continue. So we really needed the support of managers to, help us take the organisation through that experience and get the implementation. And there was certainly, you could call it resistance on the ground, because it was really challenging to teach people how to learn a brand new system, in that environment when they had all the other things going on that COVID brought, and other things that we were doing in the organisation at the same time as well.
Yeah, it's actually a nice segue into another question or two about what's the relative importance of other practices you have in place, such as getting the right processes locked in, a performance management system around this. Were any of those particular practices you think particularly important for the success of this change?
So systems were certainly important, but processes was also really important. So again, as you're getting bigger as an organisation, needing to ensure that there's alignment, consistency of practice, that there's strong governance, that we can, meet our accreditation standards, that the client therapies are happening in the way that we want them to happen. Having that clarity of processes was really important. It's something that we're still wrestling with, and we've got some, we've definitely got some growing pains around that, in that, some of the systems and processes are a bit clunky, or they don't quite work together. So that's actually a focus in our business plan next year, to try and rationalise and streamline some of those, so it has less impact for the user at the other end.
And looking at time, and I know you have another town hall to go off to in about 15 minutes. Maybe one more question about the employer branding, and in particular, you've got a presence in a lot of areas and regional towns. And how have you gone about employer branding, both within your head office but also in your more remote locations?
So that's an area that we've invested in, particularly this year, and we're about to launch our employer brand. So we went very similar to the way that we went through to discover our values. We went through a similar process to discover, what is our employee value proposition? What is the unique differentiating offering that we make to potential employees? So in doing that, we've developed some key statements and key reflections about the organisation. So that's certainly both around what we think you'll gain from joining us, but it's also quite a realistic picture of, for example, if you struggle with embracing change, then we're not going to be the right fit for you. So in terms of representing ourselves in that way, we'll have a bunch of collateral that we'll use in recruitment marketing, across various ways. Regionally, it's the local relationships, it's the local reputation, it's our credibility. people tell each other the stories of what it's like working where they work. So our own employees are our biggest ambassadors there. And they tell us stories of how they've identified someone that they think's an LLW person, that they just don't know it yet, and how they work with those people to help them understand our organisation and encourage them when an opportunity arises.
Yeah. All right, brilliant. Look, we are hitting 1 o'clock, so I know, Karen, you have a place to go, and I'm sure many of our audience do as well. So look, thank you so much for the time, the energy that you've put into preparing and delivering this presentation. I know it's not an insignificant effort at a busy time of the year for you. So look, really appreciate. You've given us great insight into what you've done at Lives Lived Well. It's a touching story and a humbling story as well, going along with the one of your values. And it's nice to see that written into values. So really appreciate your time. We do have a gift for you, which we'll arrange to have delivered after the presentation. Okay, everyone, that about wraps things up. We will make a copy of the slides available, and I'm just going to flip back over to my slides. There's a link there. There's a copy of the slides. I believe they're available now or will be very shortly if you want to have a copy of Karen's slides. We have also recorded this webinar, and we'll be putting that up on our websites within the next couple of days. Give us a little while to do that, and we'll notify everyone about the availability of that recording. And finally, before the webinar, or when you try to finish the webinar, there'll be a short feedback survey that pops up. If you can just give us a minute to fill out that feedback, that'd be great for us. It's good feedback for us designing our future webinars. So look, thanks everyone. That brings us to the end of the webinar. I know it's been a busy time for everyone, but have a great Christmas, and hopefully we'll see you at our next webinar. Thanks. Bye.